Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder of Streamlined Properties and the team leader of Streamlined Properties on Market, brokered by eXp Realty. Whether you are looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Welcome back to another week of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. Before we get to our amazing guest, actually, I'm going to do it so quickly. If you like the show, just subscribe. If you really like it, write us a 5-star review, share with your friends. It's fine. This is just what we need to do as podcast hosts. I want to get to my guest, Ashley Wilson. She is unbelievable. You better listen to this whole episode. She's the founder of Bar Down Investments. Now she is a partner there with our prior guest, Jay Scott. She's also the author of The Only Woman in the Room, a Bigger Pockets book. You need to wake up, get your coffee ready, and listen up. Here comes Ashley. This is episode 43 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Ashley Wilson. Ashley is the founder of Bar Down Investments, the co-founder of Apartment Addicts, and House It Look, the best-selling author of The Only Woman in the Room, Bigger Pockets book. With knowledge and inspiration from 20 women real estate investors, she's been all over Bigger Pockets for years, managed over 10 million in construction, and been involved in over 120 million in transactions since 2009. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great to finally talk to you. We have one of your partners at Bar Down, Jay Scott, only 6 episodes ago. So it's great to finally get in touch with you as well.
Nice. Yeah, he's amazing.
The story of how he got to you, I think, is so amazing. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But before 2009, did you have general interest in real estate or any? Because it's always interesting to me to find out how everybody got to real estate, like the first time they decided this was going to be something for them.
Real estate was intriguing to me when I was younger, and having a father as a general contractor and having his own business, I saw it from the other side. I never thought it was within reach. My family and I grew up relatively poor, so the fact that we could benefit from real estate was something that I couldn't even have dreamt of. Thus, I never really thought to pursue real estate. I never knew how I could leverage existing skills that I have or network with people and use what they have and partner it with skill sets that I have to be able to enter the industry.
Yeah. And don't you think that what you learned just on that is what's so important for new investors now? Because there's so much out there like on social media, but a lot of people still feel like it's out of reach, and it's not. If you can use things like you said, we all have existing skill sets that we can put in to help us get there. What was your first interest? Were you interested in properties? How did it first come that you started to look at properties and then buying?
Well, it actually started more so in 2007. So in 2007 is when my husband introduced me to real estate as a vehicle in which we could diversify our retirement strategy. We started listening to Bigger Pockets and diving into that network and identifying ways in which we could tap into real estate as compared to the traditional way, which most people invest is through their IRA or 401k and participating in the stock market. My husband came across real estate because it has huge tax benefits. It's an asset-backed investment. Certain asset classes tend to be recession resistant, for example, multifamily, which is what we pursue today. But ultimately, we armed ourselves with knowledge for approximately 2 years before we took our first dipping our toes into the water, so to speak, and purchased a single family house, which we did a dual strategy of both house hacking and short-term rentals. And that was in 2009. So it took us a little while. Going back to what your comment was earlier about how easy it is to get into real estate today, it's actually easier to get into real estate today than it was even in 2009. And I'm not even talking about what was going on with the economy. I'm actually talking about the access to information.
Yeah.
is so plentiful today.
Yeah. Is that what helped propel you guys? Is really a lot of people see bigger pockets and then they start to figure out what's real. And then you realize, wait, there's a lot of people doing this. Is that what helped open your eyes and then created connections through there?
I think by listening to different people's stories and strategies, it always resonates with you in respect to what do you have in common with that person. So that's something that you then build confidence off of to take your first step. And with respect to my upbringing and access to construction and that experience and knowing how to do projects, that seemed to be most people's hurdle. And for me, that was my strength. So fast forward, that's the way how I actually got into commercial real estate, is partnering with a group of people who had no experience with construction. And while they were under contract on a 124 unit, one of the buildings burnt to the ground and they had no idea how they were going to be able to manage the project of bringing that building back online. So it's funny how it comes full circle, but coupled with that, I had a lot of experience of managing from afar. I never really realized that skill set and how valuable that skill set would be for me, especially today. My team is across the entire country. Our investments are always out of state. So it tends to lend itself very well to be able to communicate effectively and efficiently when you have a virtual team, so to speak, who are located throughout the country, but are needing to do all different aspects of management of this investment. That's something I learned when I worked in corporate America, and I worked in pharmaceuticals, specifically in clinical research and development for 3 major pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah. So you obviously built systems when you built Bar Down, and that probably helped you grow quicker than other people who just start off throwing everything at the wall and hoping it works and trying to do it all themselves. Did you know, I guess based on your experience, you knew in order to grow, you would need to diversify and get bigger and hire the right people. When did you and your husband start realizing that one thing could become much more?
So at the time, my husband wasn't involved in real estate at all. He really wanted to do it more of a passive venture when we first started. And we did try to set it up as a passive structure. So he was really trying to get me interested in it. And once I got interested in it, then I started running with it. And we started with the short-term rentals and then long-term rentals. And then I was talking to him one day and I said, I think we should flip houses with my father. And he was still not in the day-to-day. He, wasn't really involved at all in it, to be perfectly honest. And then my dad and I started a high-end flipping company in 2014. And I was quite successful doing that with my father. And that happened until 2018. And then in 2017, my husband and I were having a conversation. The flipping business is huge tax exposure to the tune of 1 year. We wrote a 6-figure check, and that was equivalent to doing basically one of the renovations for free on one of the flips. So
Right.
Once that really smacked me in the face, I said, there's got to be a better way. And we turned to commercial investing. And then we started partnering with this group. Once again, my husband wasn't involved as much in it as most people when they say they're working with their spouse. It's kind of 50-50.
Yeah.
He helped with the underwriting initially. He does more of our underwriting today. He does all of our underwriting today. But at that time, we were looking to partner with other established groups. And that's how we thought we were going to build Bar Down, is we would partner with groups. Him and I would vet the underwriting. I would run asset and construction management, and we would be called in on difficult projects to manage. That is a very tough way to build a business, because most people who want to bring you in because they are already in a really bad position,
Exactly.
most likely because they either underwrote poorly, they bought the wrong debt, they don't know what they're doing. And ultimately the reputation follows the asset manager, not the underwriter. That's not something I wanted to bank my reputation on. So I said, I'm not doing this. We'll build our own company and we'll buy our own investments. So that's what we started doing.
Yeah.
And then shortly after, Jay and I reconnected and we started working together, and that led into a partnership. And That's the partnership that I'm in today. Jay and I are partners with Bar Down. My husband's really solely focused on the underwriting side of things, but he doesn't want to be involved in the day-to-day. And then Jay and I launched a coaching platform on multifamily 2 years ago called Apartment Addicts. And that program helps provide the full picture of multifamily ownership to interested people, because there are a lot of coaching programs out there, but they really focus on how to find or acquire properties and how to raise money for them, but no one really teaches you how to operate them. And that's not something we wanted to set people up to fail. We want to set people up to succeed. So that was the cornerstone of what we built.
Yeah.
For our program.
Yeah. So many things in there. I guess I'm going to work backwards. Apartment Addicts sounds so great because I completely agree with you. I feel like there's so many different kinds of coaching programs out there, but they're always forward facing for what you were saying. Hey, acquisition, you're going to make big money. And like we all know in multifamily, you lose all your money in how you're managing the properties. And if you don't know what you're doing, the tenants can get away from you. You buy buildings with tenants that you didn't expect. You incur deferred maintenance that you weren't paying attention to. Why was it so important for you guys to make something that's more well-rounded? Is it because of what you saw other people failing in the space, or just wanting to help people? Because I know that you do, from talking to Jay and from knowing what you guys have been doing, that your goal is really to help people not make mistakes in going into this apartment.
We really want to see people succeed. And we really want to see not only owners succeed, but properties succeed. When we buy properties, we don't buy them with the sole purpose of just increasing our investors' returns. We believe in social responsibility. So what we do on a property level and on an investment level is we want to be the beacon of the community. So we take a property that's underperforming, and what we want to do is we want to work with local businesses and charities and different organizations. And then the current community or prospective tenants of the community, we want all of them to want to call that place a home, not a temporary residence, not a place that they rent from, but somewhere that they feel at home because it is home. And we want the community, the greater community, to be proud of that investment. The only way that is achieved is through really strong operations. And when I look around and saw all these other coaching programs, for better or for worse, I don't know if it was really malintent or just lack of knowledge, but ultimately setting people up for failure, because what these programs did is they only taught how to operate for one market cycle. They only taught people how to operate in an environment in which cap rates are compressing. But the reality is that's not sustainable. So in terms of teaching someone how to manage a property through all market cycles, I think is a greater benefit, not only to that individual person, their team, their investors, but the community at large. A community is the one who really loses out. Yeah, we can talk all day long about investors losing their capital, but typically an investor is only investing, and I know it's a lot of money. I'm not trying to minimize the loss here, but it's $100,000 as opposed to someone who lives at a property and the property being foreclosed on, and maybe they are kicked out of their property, or maybe they can't, whoever takes over the property once it's foreclosed on doesn't have the capital to get it up and running. And that doesn't even speak to how long the property's been in that condition in the first place. Right. And people aren't advocating for these people who might be living with mold in their homes. That has health consequences to these tenants. Those are greater issues than $100,000, which most investors could find another way to make $100,000, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of the sacrifice on your health and children's health and elderly, I think that is a bigger issue that we should all be concerned with. So it starts from knowing what to do at the beginning. And that's why it's so important to us to teach people the full scope of apartment ownership.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a trickle-down effect of pride of ownership. You as a GP or a full owner of a complex, if you start with pride of ownership, take care of the things that need to, that trickles down all the way to the newest tenants, oldest tenants, the ones who have never felt it. And I've always said, don't you feel like when you take over a new apartment complex, that changeover is so important because you actually have to convince everybody that you're not like the prior landlords that let it get that way. And that's not easy some of the time because it's just they're used to somebody who doesn't really care what happens to the apartments.
I completely agree with you.
Have you guys, what's that transition like? Say you're doing whatever it is, 100 plus units. How are you making that transition with your team to make sure that everybody knows, no, we're like the good kind of landlord? Because we all know there's bad landlords. We pick up for them all the time. But what type of things do you do to make sure that it gets off started on the right foot so they know we're going to try to help you? It can't work for everybody, but your goals are in line with what they should be. You just have to get them on board as well.
Communication, transparency, and hitting the ground running. So our business plan is well defined prior to us acquiring the property. So on day one, we literally hit the ground running.
Yeah.
All communications sent out. It's very transparent what we're going to do to all of the tenants. We let the tenants know these are the changes that you're going to be seeing in the upcoming months. Should you have any questions, here are contact information, the appropriate contacts and contact information to get in touch with the appropriate people. If you have any concerns, questions, comments, etc., they can all be filtered through those channels. We also we literally walk the site the day we acquire it with the contractors to shore up everything, get the contract signed, and get things rolling. So we typically change over a property in under 18 months, and that's all of the renovation encompassing of evicting non-paying residents. Oftentimes, the previous landlord allows criminals on the property, so it's very hard to create a safe community when you have, for example, convicted felons and pedophiles and all sorts of people who do not support a safe environment in which families can bring their children on the property. So what we try to do is clean house immediately and start renovations immediately. So people see that we're not just sending out a letter saying it's coming and months later, then something happens. But communication is key to any business. I forget where I read it, but it was something to the effect of 95% of businesses fail because of lack of communication. And when you're acquiring multifamily, you're not a real estate investor, you're a business investor. And this is a business. How you own and operate is all based on your business skills, not your real estate investing skills. They're two separate ways in which you would operate based on whether or not you're a real estate investor versus a business investor. I like to say that I invest in a business and real estate just happens to be attached to that business. It's a bonus. But we look at it in terms of a business and how do we want to create a long, sustainable business that people can be proud of all the things, that I was saying before. But communication, you cannot communicate too much in these situations because you have so many balls in the air and a lot of things that are moving very quickly. So it's really good to keep communicating with your residents and making sure that it's known what you are doing and why you are doing it.
Yeah, because of those transitions, like just on a general, what percentage of a new takeover would you say you have to evict or who are unpaying, just on a general project?
Yeah, it really depends on how distressed the asset is. I would say on very heavy distressed assets, we've evicted sometimes. Most of the time, you don't have to evict. Let's say, for example, it's the entire property isn't qualified to be on the property. Most of the time, you're going to evict maybe, let's say, 50% because the other 50% is either going to skip or not renew.
Right.
So they self-select, especially tenants are very savvy people. And the more distressed the asset is, I personally find the more savvy the tenant is at playing the system.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
They know how to live for free. And when they see someone come in and they see the resources we deploy on day one, that scares off a lot of people, really.
Yeah.
It does. So we are fortunate that we can have people realize, okay, this group's not putting up with BS, so we got to get out of here.
Yeah.
So that helps because then we don't have to pay the eviction fees and we can start renovating the unit right away and we don't have to wait. And it also, I'd rather start with a clean house than trying to evict people because it's longer to transition. Because when you're trying to get new tenants in the door and say, we're building this safe community, and they look around, it doesn't look safe. It's better to look empty than have the wrong people in the property. It's an easier story to sell. I would say that most of the time you're probably evicting maybe 20 to 30%.
Yeah, that's what I was going to guess.
A little bit higher today just because of where we are with COVID. But historically, I would guess 20 to 30% on a middle of the tier, like middle of the road, mid-tier type of distressed asset.
Yeah. You said something interesting, though, that I think maybe people need to hear again. So if you're dealing with, you're picking up low C properties, there's definitely going to be some criminal activity in there. It was really interesting because the fact that you take possession and immediately get to work and show them that we're going to be around is enough to push them out without having to have a confrontation, because they know you're going to do stuff. That means just more eyes on the properties, more code enforcement permits. People are going to be there. And instead of having to come in and knock on every door, say, hey, are you guys doing crimes? You need to get out of here. They just know they're just going to go over to one that's not paying attention, like you said, because they're savvy tenants. They also know when there's a major foreclosure that they're not going to have to pay. And that's a really important point, because I think just by being there and present, showing up on day one and getting to work shows the good tenants that you're there to help them, but also the bad tenants, hey, there's going to be a lot of people around. So if you have stuff going on, somebody's going to call. And they're just going to, like you said, self-select and go check out for a new place.
Here's another tip. This is something that we do across all of our properties before we acquire a property. And then every time we go visit that property, after we acquire it, we always drive the property at night. Yeah. And before you acquire the property, one of the best things that could happen is that there's no lights on at the property at night, because it's the easiest overnight transition you can do to get rid of riffraff.
Just lights.
So what we normally do is we come in and we put in a full LED package, exterior LED package that's normally done within the first 2 weeks. We have that set up ready to go, and we have that fully installed. And people leave just because you lit the property up. Yeah. You may have one or two people complain that it's too bright, but who cares? Crime does not happen where it's well lit up. Crime happens in dark corners where no one's able to see what's going on. That's something that we do on every single property. And then when we visit the property after we own it, every single time we come, we drive it at night to make sure there aren't any lights out, because as soon as there's a light out, that's when your crime appears immediately.
That is a fantastic
hate to say
point.
it, but it's like cockroaches. You just gravitate towards darkness.
Yeah, no, but that's something that I think probably, from what you said, separates Apartment Addicts from other coaching programs. That is a much, much smarter approach. It's also client-centric for the ones that you want to stay. And it's low-cost input for maximum, effect. And I think there's other groups that say, oh, don't put in lights all the way. That's just going to be another cost right away. But your cost benefit to that is so huge. Like you said, just by putting lights in, people are just going to self-select, get out of the area because they're going to get caught doing something.
Well, to your point, people will say that's not the normal order of operations. I want to do my siding and paint first, and then I want to do my lights, which in a normal renovation process order, that is correct. You should not put up lights prior to that. But the problem is you have to be able to, and this is why I think asset and construction management should be under the same umbrella, is because I do both asset and construction management. The asset management piece of it outweighs the construction order of operations piece. So in terms of if you wait to install the LEDs and you're doing carpentry repairs and painting, you could be 2 to 3 months out. How is your operation team able to sell what you're doing for 2 to 3 months when crime's continuing to happen on the property? They can't evict, people aren't skipping. It's easier just to light the whole property up like a Christmas tree and then pay extra to take down a light, put it back up and paint, whatever, get it done later. Because at that time, you aren't dealing with any of that riffraff 2 to 3 months out. It's easier for one day to not have that light on, just to do the repair and then fix it. And I know it costs more, but I'm telling you, it costs a lot more if you do it the other way.
I completely agree. I think it's so smart. And I love that you mentioned the asset.
My investment advice is always focused on assets. Like I look at assets. I don't even barely use spreadsheets. Obviously, on large scale, multifamily, you're going to use spreadsheets to evaluate. But there's something that I think those of us who get seasoned can look at properties and see that's much beyond numbers. And you're talking about managing the asset first, which is lighting it up, getting rid of the element that's causing it to come down. And that also allows it to be a safer space. It also makes it easier for you to do the work when it's lit. I think a lot of people forget that part of construction management is protecting all the sites from small scale one-off flips to apartment buildings. When you're renovating, people will come on and steal stuff. So the more lights, the better for the more you're bringing in refrigerators, new units, hot water heaters, coppers everywhere. People are going to come for it. And have you found that I guess it's a really your management principle that's obvious. If you show up on the first day and you immediately get to work and you don't stop until you're done, it's just going to be a cycle. Whereas, like you said, there's others who buy a property, nothing happens, it sits the same, and they're still trying to figure out the management.
Today's episode is brought to you by Streamline Properties On Market, brokered by eXp Realty. That is actually my on-market real estate team. We have close to 50 real estate agents in 4 states, primarily in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. We work with traditional buyers and sellers and all investors, no matter what you're looking to do in real estate investing. We have you covered. You can get all the information you need at our website, which is www.streamlined.properties.
How many people have you guys had through Apartment Addicts now in the 2 years?
I don't know how many total people that we've had through the program. I would guess probably, I don't know, maybe a few hundred. We have people stay for a pretty long time in the program, which I think is really good. But recently in January, we hired a new director of program management for Apartment Addicts. And she has completely revamped the program and made it to a whole other level, which is phenomenal. So before we used to offer one product, and when people left, they either left for one of 2 reasons. It's too easy or it's too hard. Those were the only comments we got. But it was really hard to deliver a product to fit all different people's needs. So now what we have is we actually have 4 different products. One has yet to launch, but it's just going to be people who are interested on a very high level of real estate and multifamily knowledge, and it's going to be a minimal commitment. Then we have Apartment Addicts Accelerated, which we've already launched that program, so to speak, but the official start date is coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So we actually have our crash course this week that will then funnel into the official launch. So that's for people who have yet to acquire their first multifamily property, but they know they want to do multifamily. It's an accelerated program. You learn all of the basics over a 6-month period of time. And then we have Apartment Addicts Community, which is a program for more seasoned multifamily investors. It taps into all of our experts and resources and really strong network of like-minded folks. And then we have Mastermind, which are for people who are at the top level. They are building empires at this point. So it's more focused on business building as opposed to just all the day-to-day of multifamily. There is some multifamily component of it as well, but Mastermind is completely separate. It's an annual membership as opposed to the other ones who are ongoing. So that's something that Rachel, our director, has been able to identify, and we've reorganized all the content so it's appropriate depending on your level, which content you get fed and which content is maybe for people who are more advanced, so it doesn't overwhelm you when you're getting started.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is tough for some investors. Maybe they've listened to podcasts for 2 years, so they think they know stuff, but they have never applied it. So they don't even know how it actually applies. They just have a lot of words swirling around in their head, like one of the forums on Bigger Pockets. You say all of the acronyms, but you don't actually know what they all mean. In terms of your multifamily acquisition, due to that tenant base, are you looking in more areas that are more tenant friendly across the United States? If you're balancing, like I live in New Jersey, is not tenant friendly. There's not a lot of like multifamily syndicators who are like, yeah, let's go to New Jersey or New York because they're so tenant friendly. Are you looking for landlord friendly states where you can make sure that if you need to do mass evictions at once, that it'll at least be easier?
I personally do, but I make an argument that you don't need to do that. I think that anyone can invest in any given market and be successful in any given market because it all depends on what someone's skill set is. So, for example, people could argue it's easier and more profitable to be in a landlord friendly state. And if you're going to do the work, why not do it there? Because you have less resistance if you have legislation backing your operations and it's easier to process an eviction as an example. But someone could also argue it's easier to manage non-distressed assets and core plus assets.
Yeah.
And I go after distressed assets. So at the end of the day, you got to pick your poison and you have to figure out what your strength is and what you can be advantageous on working in, what space. I have always found across my entire career, the more niche-y you become, the more lucrative it is because the less competition you have. So my business operations right now, we've set up our entire business operations for landlord-friendly states with heavily distressed assets. Do I think that I would not be successful in maybe a state like New Jersey? Not with those same business operation structure, but if I shifted my structure, I'd actually probably be more lucrative in New Jersey. Just to your point, less people are going there. So in terms of my going in cap rate, I'd have a more competitive going in cap rate than I do, let's say, in Houston, which is where we target most of our acquisitions just due to competition alone. So I think I was asked to coach this other coaching program. They bring in experts on the weekend and do like a full day seminar. And they wanted me to talk on market selection. And I did this full day training. And there was this whole discussion at the end because they were like, we have never been in a market training where it wasn't very clear as to what you actually do. It's always very biased information based off of what that person does.
Right.
But you provide a dual-sided argument. And I said, everyone should always provide a dual-sided argument because you're forgetting your personal input on that situation has an influence on the success. Leverage your experience, leverage your skill set, and pick one that fits for you. Don't go off of my experience because my experience is not your experience, right? So you can learn from my experience, but it doesn't mean that you have to follow my footsteps. You can create your own path.
Yeah. And like you said, they may have a different personal skill set. So to be at the head or the GP, it may be different. Really interesting what you said, though. I started thinking about it as you were saying, the difference between the two and how it could work in both. I think that if you're in a landlord-friendly state, it might almost be too easy to just send the eviction notice and you don't get good at building relationships with the people. And so if you are in a tenant-friendly state, you're going to have to be better at building relationships because I think people forget when you have tenants can do whatever they want to the apartment. If they want to put rocks down the toilet, they can put rocks down the toilet. So you're still in the people business either way. And you may actually end up learning more in that tenant-friendly state because you have to interact with them to make sure that you find out some resolution to move people out of properties. 100 units in a tenant-friendly state is hard, but I think by the end of that, you're going to know a lot more than maybe you would in an easy one where you just send out 50 eviction notices and wait until it happens. Those are great points, not ones that I've even thought of as well. What do you think the hardest part of like tenant management in today's climate is, like economy wise?
Tenant management, I think, is challenging when it comes to, is the industry going to respond to previous landlord debt on tenants' credit report? I think that is probably the greatest challenge that we will be facing in the near future. Because if you just look at the overwhelming amounts of people who have been evicted due to COVID-related, non-paying, out of work, whatever the reason may be over this past 2 years, I think that we're going to see a lot of new companies emerge who are willing to take on that risk insurance. I think we'll probably have the birth of a lot of risk insurance programs backed by VC capital, venture capital, PE groups that might take on that risk. But that I think is the biggest challenge right now, because at the end of the day, these buildings need heads and beds. So when you take out, let's call it 50% of the rental market, because they have previous landlord debt from COVID, how is the industry going to respond to that? I think we calculated in Houston, there's 7,600. Now, don't quote me on this, but we use the numbers that are being reported publicly to ascertain that there's approximately 7,600 people being evicted each week. Well, where are they going is the question. So I think that is something that needs to be figured out. And if you believe then all of this new supply is coming online, I personally do not. And that's another discussion. But I don't buy into that at all. But if you do believe in that, that's going to create an even greater problem. So we might even see more of a recession in the CRE space, which no one had called for with COVID. I think initially, but then when the government stepped in, everything kind of course corrected. So we'll see.
Yeah. Do you think because new acquisitions or new products are the first people who don't want that COVID debt of tenants because they're brand new? I don't know where they go. Where can they go? It's very difficult. Maybe they're going to smaller multi-landlords, not apartment buildings, multifamilies, where maybe the people are doing less vetting, not using NTN or doing those checks. But yeah, that's definitely going to be an issue. Because you're saying there's so many people who have dings on their credit and tenant reports just from not being able to pay during COVID. And like for most of our small scan landlords and large, we run a packet, see what they have, criminal history, credit score, and availability, and any walkaways. And if they have a walkaway, it's tough. It's tough for a landlord to accept. But I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot out there that there's going to be a lot more explanation letters that hopefully help people get back into properties.
I think there's going to be probably too a lot of petty, like forgery in terms of documents to be able to get approvals. And it's almost a perfect storm with all of this AI creation and how that is going to impact the scalability of those businesses, because I think it's something that overnight can be a massive issue just because the mass production of documents created with these new technologies is something that is no longer a barrier to entry.
Yeah, now they have AI voice. So AI voice can be those recommendations, even if you don't know the person, but if they needed to do it. Yeah, that just going to create a whole nother level of vetting on our end that we're going to need to get through to hopefully make it work. As a large scale apartment syndicator, what do you think the hardest part is now? Like, again, this landscape and the acquisition mode, what's the hardest part for people looking for those large scale apartments right now?
Pricing's still there's still a big gap in the industry. It's still approximately 10 to 15% off buyers' expectations and sellers' expectations is what I'm seeing. I also think debt is a huge problem. So debt is probably forcing that gap even wider than 10 to 15% in terms of expectations. But the lack of availability of bridge debt, construction loans, those things are going to have a trickle-down effect on pricing. That's a huge problem. Another problem is insurance in certain markets is skyrocketing. We went some numbers in Houston. We went from like $975 a door to quotes anywhere from $1,450 to $1,600 a door on one property within a single year, which is insane. But that's not as insane as what we were looking at in Florida. So we were looking at a deal in Florida. It was 800 and change, like 835. And all of the quotes we got from multiple sources were over $2,100. And this is not in a flood zone. Yeah. This is a property that has, take the run loss report, no history. So in terms of insurance killing deals, we've talked about it for years. People projected that it would happen a lot later than it's happening, but it's happening now. I think we can all agree the natural disasters that are happening throughout the country are starting to be not a 1,000-year storm or 100-year storm, but annual storm. And that is wreaking havoc on the insurance industry. And it's having a huge negative impact, not only on cash position for investors, but also on the NOI approach, which is one of the ways and arguably the most common way in which multifamily and commercial real estate is evaluated.
Yeah, that's going to drag down the potential NOI and make it harder for people to buy. But like you said, there's a trickle down for there. So then those sellers who can't offload it because the savvy buyers don't want it, it doesn't make sense based on the new insurance numbers, that may lead them into that large scale building foreclosure, which then goes back to the problem that we were talking about that you have to take over. I guess they're in a quandary. Like you were saying, that 10 to 15% is getting bigger because they have more debt on it. And now it becomes a little bit harder to sell. They want more, but it's technically worth less to the savvy buyer because we know
millions
what the numbers look like.
Yeah, millions less. And then how do lenders equate for this change for existing owners? Because then it hits DSCR. So all of these properties going to be triggered into lockbox. I hope not, but I think lenders right now are in a really precarious situation.
You can tell, especially on the commercial end, you can just tell by the fluctuation in rates over different products. There's too many options, but they're crazy. You can go week to week and not see something that even looks manageable on your end. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. For those holding a lot of debt in properties, that's definitely going to be a problem coming up. And it's, I guess, whether the buyers are willing to take it on at what point and what point the owners are willing to give up, which is always the pushing point of off-market acquisition or on-market, especially even on the larger scale. Let me go to a couple questions from our pre-questionnaire. Let's talk about grit. It's something that a lot of people mention for investors, but why do you think it's so important? Is it just in terms of helping people stay on it long term? I think people are so short-term focused that grit is such an important thing to have, but they also have to know it's not like for the next year. Like you have to keep going to get through this.
Grit's important. Grit's always been important, but I think in today's society, it's more important because we're surrounded by so many influences that have instant gratification.
Yeah.
Twitter was the advent, I believe, in terms of an accelerator event that has caused us to have a thirst for needing instant gratification. And that's through the limit of text characters. So I think when Twitter originally came out, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 120 characters. So getting people to get to the point faster.
Yeah.
Instagram exacerbated it in terms of the reels and pictures and not needing dialogue to explain the pictures, have your picture stand for itself. TikTok is another example. So all we're doing is getting to the point where messaging becomes very succinct and our brains are capable of processing things faster. So unfortunately, that has taken a toll on our patience. With every strength is an opposite weakness. And now our society is becoming really weak at patience, and grit, in my opinion, is tied very closely with patience. And it's the ability to overcome adversity through a prolonged period of time. Multifamily investing, commercial investing in general, is not a foot race. It's not a 100-yard sprint. It is a marathon. And when people transition into commercial real estate, they're typically transitioning from a short-term investment structure and strategy to a long-term investment structure and strategy. Coupled with the fact that the market has been so favorable over the past few years, people's investing strategies perform it out anywhere from 3 to 5 to even 10-year holds, and we're able to exit within 2 years.
Yeah,
and I think we get a Pavlov's dogs scenario where people are being rewarded for not doing the work and being rewarded, so they want to rinse and repeat. And we're not in an economy today that lends itself to that. And people don't know how to operate. So it ends up that we're in this situation where we have all of these impatient operators married to impatient investors. I can't begin to tell you how impatient some of our investors are. And they may or may not have come through our channels. Typically, they don't come through our channels. It's another partner we work with or etc. And unfortunately, if you want to invest short term, we educate people from the beginning. It might not be what you want to hear, but this is how our business operates. And whether people want to admit it or not, syndicators also, investors take notes on bad operators and say they never want to invest again with them. That's fair. And I agree with that philosophy. I don't think you should invest with bad operators at all. In fact, I'm the opposite. I think you should vet out your operators very thoroughly to pick really strong ones. But case in point, operators also don't want investors who are bad investors either, passive investors. So, we take notes too. So if someone is in a position where they need money right away, and even though we've educated them on that, they see all their friends getting their investments back in a couple of years, that's not the name of the game right now. It really isn't. Taking note of that and making sure that you pick people that support the strategy that you are looking to deploy is really important too, because it allows you to spend your time on the investment as opposed to managing personalities, right? So that's something that I think is also important.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the expectations given the last 2 years are a little out of control because, like you said, there's so many, I guess, not necessarily bailouts in the traditional sense, but if you just look at the things that Open Door and like Zillow, when they were buying, they're just overbuying on purpose. So people are getting lucky on these 2-year holds that they would normally have to wait, like you said, 5 to 10 years for. So now everybody thinks, hey, let's just go to Arizona and buy a bunch of single families and then we'll just make $100,000 in a year. And that's just not sustainable because there was really no rhyme or reason, which is why all the iBuyer companies are failing. They never really made any sense. They still don't make any sense. And they're still, attempting to go strong. So those are great points as well. When we go to one other thing, I wanted to get to your influences. So you have your husband, your dad, and Dave Van Horn. I think the influences are so important. I love that your dad was in the contracting business because you learned from him. I learned flipping and real estate investing from driving around with my dad as a kid. But what was it like growing up? Like actually like hands-on real estate, seeing construction, like you said in the beginning, that helped you immeasurably be able to wade through management of it. But what else did it teach you knowing that your dad was hands-on with real estate? And then obviously you guys eventually started a company together.
Managing contractors, I think, is a skill set in and of itself. And understanding contractors, what they're contending with. Typically, when you find a contractor who's very good at their craft, they're typically not good business people and vice versa. And it's because it's like a left brain, right brain. One's a creative output and one is more structured. They could operate any business, but most of the time they aren't good at doing both. So trying to manage expectations and understand where people are coming from. There are all these ridiculous articles, to be honest, on Bigger Pockets and other platforms that are like, oh, how do you find a good drywaller? You go to Home Depot between 5:30 and 6 a.m. because anyone who's good is going to be there. It's true in a sense, but it's also like incredibly rare. Like you're looking for unicorns. And honestly, I've done that strategy. I've gone and very few people are in Home Depot at that time. Yeah. Sometimes they are going at night or they're going later, but they also have families. They have lives. Like they're not robots. And I do have to say the one strategy that has worked out very well for us is I found the painter that we still use today. I found him, I don't even know how long ago, a decade ago at least, because he was working on a Saturday and I went and stopped and talked to him. I think that's more realistic, but you can find people, but it's very rare. And I think trying to understand everything that they're dealing with and their schedules, they all work with so many different personalities and teams because they normally come in and they're doing one aspect of a job. Yeah. Very few companies handle all aspects in-house and the teams are used to working with each other. Most of the time, an electrician is working with an HVAC and a plumber that they've never met before. Maybe they've met on a couple of jobs, but they don't work together with them all the time. And they're working with a framer they may or may not have worked with before, and an owner or a project manager they haven't worked with before. And they just get called in on these one-offs. And people like to do things different ways. So really trying to understand different personalities and how things are set up and come up with scope of work and payment plans that work are really good. If you come in organized, they really like that as long as you are not a micromanager. So I try to come in organized, but seem flexible. So that way you have expectations, but they also know they don't feel like they're working for you, because once again, remember, they're entrepreneurs as well. They don't want to work for someone. They don't like that kind of feeling. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but it's something that I've been able to witness growing up with my father, besides hammer and nail kind of thing. In fact, my brother was more on that side of it than I was. But I did see my dad partner with other people. I saw my dad work on commercial and residential and all different types of projects, Section 8. And literally, I've seen my dad work on a ton of different things. And I think that gave me the knowledge to know that there's more than one way to solve a problem.
Yeah, so important though. It's not, you can't just get a random plumber, a random electrician, a drywall person and just put them together. Like you said, they all work differently, and time is money. And time is the thing that kills most things. People are taking hard money loans to do small flips, and they're just hiring 3 people. This guy may not want to do the plumbing before they've created something that's set up for him, and you can go back and forth for 2 weeks and nothing gets done. So trying to get them organized is important, but a lot is just learning what to do on. Like, you had that access to see what it was like. Everybody's going to make mistakes, but it's so important to get that management principle in line, whether you're doing one flip or doing entire apartment buildings. If your systems are off, you're going to be in trouble, and you're going to be losing money along the way. Not sure how much, but it's going to be a lot over a long term. All right, Ashley, where's the best place for people to get in touch with you? Is it at bardowninvestments.com?
Yes, you can email me at ashley@bardowninvestments.com, and also on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Badash Investor. So B-A-D.
Everybody knows that one.
ASH Investor. Yep.
Yeah, I remember from a long time ago, a Bigger Pockets episode where I first heard of you. So definitely a long time ago. And then that handle was always a good one. It stands out. Yeah, it's great. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm so glad that we finally got to connect. I look forward to talking to you more, and with Jay as well. But thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. This was episode 43 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. I'm Jonathan Green, and that was my guest, Ashley Wilson of Bar Down Investments. We'll see you next week. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with me, Jonathan Green. And I just want to remind you, and this is always an uncomfortable part, I don't want you to think that I'm begging for you to like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you have to do for the podcast, leave a 5-star review. But if you like the podcast and you think it adds value in the real estate investing sphere, then just do me a personal favor. Like the podcast, follow it, share it when you can with your friends, and be so kind as to write a 5-star review if you believe it deserves a 5-star review up against what else is out there. I would really appreciate it, and I hope you keep listening.